Hello, welcome to this video on the Havoc C2 framework. In a previous video, I went over how to install and configure that framework, and now I'm going to explore the Havoc client user interface. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get my team server up and running. And I'm also going to fire up the client side. I already have my profile built, so I'm going to connect, and now the user interface launches. So this is the default user interface that I have, and in the top left corner is where you will see all your sessions. In the right side, by default, Event Viewer launches, but other things will tab out here. In the bottom window here, you have Teamserver Chat by default displayed, and then again, as you load and use different functions of the UI, different tabs will populate here with information as well. When you are going between tabs, you'll notice the tab with the workspace you're in has this pink kind of border around it, and that's how you kind of know where you're at. So the first thing I'll go over is the Teamserver Chat. Let me just get another client logged in over here. Change that to the right team server, and let's make it a different user and connect. And now we can see that two users have connected to the same team server, and they can communicate via team chat if they want, if they are remote or something. Well, and I can never type. So Neo sends Ricky a message, and it displays on Ricky's client as well. So just a neat little thing. This keeps the operators from to go in and out of their maybe different chats and stuff like that. The only thing that I've noticed is when you do have a bunch of tabs up here, if someone is communicating with you, or at least in my test environment, this tab never lit up or did anything special to let you know that a message was new, or that wanted to come inbound and you didn't read it yet, or something like that. So that's something to note. But it'll be displayed on both clients. I'm going to primarily stick with the Ricky client though. And chugging along here, if we go up to the top, you can see that as you hover over there, like if you click on Havoc, it drops down, and you can see you have some options here. We get to view. At this point now, I'm not even clicking since I've already clicked once. I'm just kind of scrolling back and forth, and it drops everything down for me. But if I look, I can see the listeners here: session view, team chat, loot, event viewer, and the team server. So let's just talk about team server first. So if you click on team server, it's going to give you a tab here, and you can see again the workspace that I'm seeing from the tab is highlighted. But this is nothing more than the running log that's on the team server. And if we went back to the terminal window, you can see that this is what it's displaying when you click on that. So I'm not going to keep that up. If we were to go to listeners, so let's create some listeners first because we need those. Again, you're going to get a tab down here in the lower window. We can add, and we can start adding some listeners. We're going to start with HTTPS. You have four different options. But first we'll start with HTTPS, and basically it's going to pull information from your configuration file that you loaded on the team server, which was that Havoc YATL configuration file. So if I had a bunch of domains and different IP addresses and all that infrastructure set up, I could have that in that config file and then start adding all of those hosts and domains and subdomain, whatever I had in there, to run with this listener. And by default, this one brings in my team server IP as the host bind IP address. But you can also, depending on how your infrastructure is set up, select loopback or your local, and any. I'm going to keep everything default though and hit save. And you can see that everything down here in the listeners tab has now populated, and you can also see it has created an event here. So I'm going to create two more listeners. Another one will be HTTP, and again I'll keep all the defaults, and I'm going to create one more, which is SMB, and I'm going to label that pivot because I'll use it for a pivot down the line here. And for me, I'm just going to bring in this pipe name. You can create any pipe, honestly, for that. But for this, I'm going to throw in a pipe that is common for Chrome. I'm going to hit save, and now I have my listeners set up. So now that my listeners are set up, I need to grab some or create some payloads so that I can start launching and creating some sessions. So it's going to use the daemon agent. You have all your listeners you just created, or what you're selecting from. You can change the architecture, and then you can select different formats. I'm just going to stick with the defaults for now. All this is getting pulled from your config file as well, and once you're ready, hit generate. It's going to take a minute for it to do its thing, and once it's done, you'll see a pop-up window appear for so you can save your payload. Okay, so after it finishes building that payload, now you get the option to save it. So I already have a directory created for payloads, and this is an HTTPS one. So I'm going to put in there, and you can name it whatever it is you want to name it, and save. And I'm going to do this a couple more times. Okay, now we've got listeners, we have payloads. I'm going to go ahead and spin up my Windows Active Directory lab, and just so you know, I have turned off the antivirus on the host that I'm going to be running the Havoc daemon agent on. So the purpose of that is just to be able to use the user interface here without any distractions and familiarize myself with all the different commands and tools, and without having to worry about antivirus finding it, destroying, basically killing my process, and then having to continuously go through that process. So, okay, so you can see here I have an extra session for some reason, but this is the default view, which is table view, and I have 3 sessions in there. The privileged and unprivileged sessions can be identified in the table view by this red font on the ID side. If we were to switch this view by selecting view, session view, and then graph, it'll now show us a nice pretty looking graph image of what we've got going on. And now we can tell that these red boxes with the computers with the lightning bolts and all the Armitage looking things, those are your privileged sessions, and the one without all that cool stuff is the unprivileged session. So from here we can go into interact mode by just right clicking and selecting interact, and we can now see that a tab populates below, and we can also do that from the table view. So again, come back to this viewpoint, and I can just select one of these, right click and select interact, and again a table or a tab will populate down here. So I've got 1, 2, let me grab this other one for funsies. And so now I have all 3 sessions down here ready to get worked on from post-exploitation point of view. So, but before we do that, up here we can play around a little more. And if we wanted to just configure some other settings that are available to us, we can just right click. And we'll get into the Explorer side in a minute, which would be listing out processes in the File Explorer, kind of cool. You can mark something as dead, so if there is an unresponsive session up here and you want to just clear the clutter, so to speak, you can mark it as dead and remove it. And if you don't have unresponsive, like they're nice, good, healthy ones, you can go through the process of exiting through a thread or process and then removing them. And I highly suggest doing that. Otherwise, when you come back into your client, you'll have a bunch of unresponsive sessions that are cluttering up your workspace from the get-go, and you'll just have to kind of do that then. So if you wanted to customize this a little bit, you can. You can make a row red. You can make them other colors. So if you had some sort of quirk where you wanted to have specific things stand out more, maybe you wanted to make the privileged sessions stand out more than the unprivileged, you can create some sort of color coding. Completely up to you, and all you got to do to reset everything is go back in and reset. And if you wanted to export the information from a setting, you just simply go and select export, and then you save this JSON file wherever you want to save it, and it's going to consist of all of the session information. So I can show you that at the end of this, and I'll just save one of those. Okay, so it tells you where it's saved at, and I click OK. All right, so let me just drag my workspace up so I've got some more room down here, and we'll get to it. And let me just point out one more thing. So again, in the Event Viewer tab over here, you can see like the listeners were created. You know, it's a running log, right? And now you can see all the different sessions and when they were initialized. And again, if we were to come back over here, we wanted to view the Teamserver Log. You can see it's doing the same thing, along with it's showing all the different things that were created prior to that, right? So when we created and built those payloads, we've got documentation of that. And then now we've got information pertaining to our payload that's running on a compromised host. Okay, let me clear that off though. So we'll jump right into this privileged session for fun. And if you have no idea what you're doing, like I didn't, the first thing that came to mind was let me run the help command. I'm sure there's help. And for sure, it displayed every single command and module that is available with this daemon agent. So pretty cool. And I came to figure out that the help command is your friend, because at face value I'm like, oh well, I kind of can probably figure these things out by just trial and error, but by combining help with these commands you're going to get some information on them. So I'll go down to one specific one that I know has some good info on it, and I will just start typing it out and let the tab complete kind of whoop. So shellcode, tab complete works. But so shellcode, I can see that just by using help and shellcode that it uses injection techniques, and there's some subcommand here, and then there's an example. But now down below it I see other commands, so maybe these are those subcommands it was talking about. So I can continue to chain the help command, and it's already wanted to complete that for me, which would be inject, and I can do the same with execute, and the other one was spawn, right? So I can do spawn, and now it gives me a lot more information here. It tells me exactly what it's doing, the behavior associated with it. It gives me an example. Behavior is cool because maybe you can you know, look at some of these behaviors and go, oh, you know what, that might be a little noisy for me, and from an operation security standpoint, I don't want to run that. Or, you know, it just gives you an idea of whether or not it's being invasive in the environment, and maybe that's not within scope. But yeah, so chaining some of these things together can just pull the string of information out a little bit more. So, I mean, I hate to say it, but you kind of need to do that with all the stuff that you're not familiar with. If there are things in here you're like, oh yeah, those are command host or Windows host, you know, post exploitation type things, or just Windows administration stuff that I'm used to and I understand it from doing host enumeration, then maybe you don't need to really go down that rabbit hole. But if there are things that you're like, oh, what is .NET? Then maybe you need to look at that, right? So what I can say is that while some of these are, hey, that looks like the normal Windows command, if you want to work in an environment where it is like you're working in a command prompt, shell is the command you want to use. There is also PowerShell in here and PowerPick, but let's just focus on shell for right now. So like shell, like, hey, I'm used to working in a shell or command prompt, and you can run the help with this if you really want to, but it's going to be, yeah, just kind of what it already shows. So the example, shell, dir, and then, you know, I'm listing out system32. So with that, you know, you can do shell, and let's just go with what? Just a standard net user command and see what populates. This should display the users on that host, right? And it does. So you've got Peter Parker, administrator, kind of all the default things. Ricky's on there somehow. Okay, so that's how it works, and it's going to display that information just like it does from a command prompt. Now I brought up .NET, and .NET is, let's just run help.NET. So it's basically used to execute and manage .NET assembly, so, you know, .exe, right? And this gives you an example of how to run a .exe, so you need to combine inline execute, the subcommand with it, and that's pretty much just like running using execute assembly with Cobalt Strike. So I'm not going to do help again. I'm just going to see if I can run inline execute. Now you need the path. So I should already have a path here that I can run with. Yeah, okay. So we can run AD search. Let's, before we go throwing a command out, let's just first make sure it runs. And I should have a domain controller running and a Windows 10 machine. So this at least should populate with something. Yep, cool. So that is definitely working. So now if I really wanted to, I should be able to use the up arrow here to bring my last command up. I should be able to just run this and get some sort of information. Now, it may not be a lot of information because I haven't been messing around with in my environment, but I should be able to get something here, right? So I should have already had these things like pre-typed out because I will probably fat finger some of these commands because that's just how I roll. But we'll see. Object category, we'll go with users. And then MSDS, right? And there it goes, one fat finger. Allowed to delegate to, and equals, we're going to go with all. And that should be good. Let me just double check that. I mean, if I mess it up, I mess it up. It'll tell me. And let's see some attributes. Let's just go with a couple here. So Sam account name. And actually, if I did this right, this should work too. I want to see that. So I can Control V that, and let's just spit it out in JSON format. And let's see if that works. So far, it looks good. It's TASI agent. And yeah, it worked, but it didn't really give me any information. So that's fine. Maybe there aren't any, there's no constrained delegation on that device, which is fine. Another handy tool that we use, right, is Rubius. So it should be in there, so I could honestly just do this. Copy that whole command out. Paste. And Rubius.exe. And we can just run triage, right? Let's see what comes back from that. So Rubius works, triage works, right? So, you can keep on going down this rabbit hole if you're familiar with the tool. All I'm really doing here is showing you that these tools can work with this user interface here. So .NET inline execute, similar to execute assembly on Cobalt Strike. All right, so now we've gone over some commands. We've gone over the help command, some of the other commands that are in here. Let's go back up here and look at some of those explore things, right? So we had explore, we have process list, and we have file explorer. And it's just like it sounds. So, you're getting all the running processes that are on that host for that machine right now. So, and you can go to these PIDs and right click and copy the PID. So if you're doing some sort of injection or impersonation, you have that ability. And then if you were to go over to the file explorer, it doesn't really show me anything. So let's see if I can force it to show me something. Jump over to file explorer since that's where we were. And what it does is it's going to populate where that agent executed. So it was in my downloads folder, or at least Peter Parker's downloads folder, and that's where you're starting at. If you start double clicking here, you're not going to get to navigate anywhere. So what you have to do here is kind of just force it. So if you understand your way around a host file system or a Windows host file system, then you can easily just kind of go this route with it. But then from there, yeah, if you were to click on Peter Parker's name, you can easily just navigate this way. But at a certain point, it's going to stop, okay? So, and no, you can't read this, but you can download. So if you didn't want to go back into a session and you're like, hey, I want this sensitive text, you can right click and hit download. and then it should download. And what we can do is find out if it did by checking the loot, and we'll get there in a second. Let me just run back over here, close those out, excuse me, go back to interact, and you can see as I opened interact, it definitely did download. So it ran the download command without me having to do it. Pretty cool. Screenshot, and if we go to help, again, go back to these commands here. Screenshot is a command. We can do screenshot and run that, and it's going to do the exact same thing. And we can run that from the unprivileged one as well. And everything looks successful. So now we can go and jump into another viewpoint, and that view is loot. So we go into loot. Now we can see there are some items here. So we can see what's being displayed. We're displaying every single session's screenshots if we wanted to see just one session. So let's look at the 3 Charlie. We get that one, which would be this privileged session here. And if we wanted to look at the other one, the BC, again, we just swap that one. Downloads, we can see that there's 2 downloads in here, and we can go back to all. There's 3 downloads total because this thing's been downloaded a lot. Everyone sees sensitive text, and I need that. But let's go back to the screenshots. So we've got screenshots. What are we seeing? And all you gotta do is highlight the screenshot, and it'll show you the screenshot off to the right side here. We can see that sensitive file is a poem. That's pretty not what I was thinking. I was hoping to some passwords right, but you get the entire screenshot. So you can move this thing around and look and see everything, you know? You can see if there was any tabs open, if they're using anything, do a little bit of a passive reconnaissance with this screenshot. So pretty cool stuff. And all we're going to do then is close out the loot. We can close out the file explorer, the process list, because we've already seen all that. And let's move on to the next thing, which would be going into extensions. So extensions are just that. They're added cool things that you can pull in or not pull in. It's completely up to you. Before I would go down the path of bringing all this stuff in, I would take a quick 5 minutes to just Google search Havoc Reporter, the P4P1, and add plus GitHub to your search to read up about what this extension does for you. What are the dependencies involved with it, stuff like that. So you don't try to start installing something and then find out it doesn't work. Or you may go, oh, I really don't need that, because it doesn't really explain over here what some of them are. Although, you know, Bloodhound, sure, I know what that is. I know this is for pivoting. This is probably for some sort of maybe privilege escalation, or maybe this is some sort of other tool, like, I don't know. But if you go to the GitHub repository, it's going to explain it way better than it does in here. But to do this, to bring one over, all you have to do, highlight it, click on install, and then you'll see a new tab pop up here, and you click down or click on that, and it'll drop down your menu items. And if you were to click on settings, then it's going to populate a tab over here, and scroll down here, and you can see the settings that you need to add into it to make it function correctly. So I'm not going to actually configure that and run it, but just wanted to show you exactly what these extensions are. And I've uploaded AutoSuite. That one's pretty cool. It automates a bunch of tasks for you, and I haven't had time to play with it yet to see how well it really works. So let me X out there. Scripts, the manager and the console, I'm going to say they kind of go along with the extensions part. So you saw where I brought in, I should have showed manager first. It was empty. Once I ran or imported that extension, it brought in the script for it here. So as you bring in those extensions or load those extensions, it's going to load the script automatically for you. If you went and created your own extension, you would have to go through the process of just adding it to the configuration file and then loading it here, and then you can use it within the application itself. The scripting console is a Python interpreter, and it's also used, from what I've seen documented online, to basically go hand in hand with those extensions, you know, like creating an extension, bringing it in here, or things like that. So if that all interests you, I would definitely read up on it. In let me go back to the extensions part. This author, so P4P1, has a pretty solid blog post on his GitHub that talks all about extensions, creating extensions, and then bringing them into the application itself. So if that does interest you, I would definitely give it a read because it's pretty well documented, and I wouldn't doubt if you reached out or jumped on the Havoc Discord and started talking about these things and plugins, that you'd be able to get some pretty solid information from the folks on there. So we've gone over pretty much everything that is, you know, necessary to get this thing up and running and start doing some post exploitation. The only other thing that I'm going to cover in here is how to exit, right? So we kind of talked about it earlier, but we can exit, and we see we get the skull here, and again we can exit and we get the skull here, and then at that point we can remove it. And the benefit of doing that is generally these when you log back in, connect back to your client, they won't pop back up as unresponsive. But if they do, then you just right click, mark as dead, and remove, and then hopefully that'll clean it up. So if we were to jump back over to this other client, let's take a look there. We can see that that client was displaying the exact same stuff, right? But this client still has them in here. So they're all dead. At this point, they can just be removed. And then you can simply disconnect and then exit. And you're done there. So go back over to Ricky, and we can do the same thing there. And so I stopped that video, but then I remembered that I mentioned I would show the contents of that exported session file. So here it is, and then here's the included information. So everything from the agent ID of that daemon agent session, computer name, domain, some IP addresses, and then some system information. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully you found some of this information helpful to you and your journey of learning Havoc C2. And if you do learn something cool and want to share it, feel free to just drop it in the comments so I can see it. Thanks, and take care.